Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome to today's talk about a topic which I think has, in recent times, and depending on your view of history, recent times can be seen as as anywhere in terms of the last few decades or centuries, but I think. In modern culture, the taboo topic of end of life has been accelerated by the rise of Western medicine, where death was seen as a failed outcome. Prior to that, and also along with the Western medicine rise and failed outcome, there's also been the outsourcing of care to those in the end of their life to homes, and also the outsourcing of the care of the dead to funeral homes. So that kind of axis in the last 100 years is actually kind of a blip in human history. Up until that point, there was very little taboo on this topic. If you read through the history books, there is kind of the opposite. Not only was it seen as an inevitability, which of course is a sensible view, but also talking about your wishes and your plans was something that was synonymous with what you would do with when you made your wedding vows. It was as important as that. So today we're going to be talking about the discussions about this that we can have, and I thought I would kick off very briefly by asking, just as a roundtable, two questions for each of us to answer. Richard, I'll start with you. First question is, why do you feel that this topic is so awkward for us? And secondly, do you feel it is important for us to somehow get over our awkwardness and discuss it? And I'll go to all of you on that point. Richard, what's your view?
Yeah, no, interesting. I think it's because we think we're going to live forever. Maybe somewhere in our brains we think we're immortal, and therefore we're probably going to live forever, and therefore we don't sort of, or we don't want to think about it. It's something, you see old people, or you hear about death. It's never going to happen to us, is kind of the thinking. So therefore we don't need to think about it now. Which is procrastination, isn't it? If you listen to guys like Marshall Goldsmith, we overestimate how long something takes, and we just procrastinate because we think it's going to be easy to do towards the end, but by that time we're not capable of doing anything about it. Yeah, I take the view of I don't think I'm actually awkward about it, because I think if you've ever been close to death, then you kind of know that it's maybe it's not as bad as you think. And I always think if I'm going to die, I'd rather kind of do it quickly. So I'm quite, in terms of the Stoics approach is not let's be boring and stoic. It's actually, you could die at any moment, so live life to the full. I think I've kind of taken on that attitude. And I've been in some interesting situations in my life and all over the world. And yeah, I think, if you think you've been close to death, it's makes you want to live more, I think. So yeah, that's me.
Prashant, I'm going to go to you because Richard mentioned the Stoics, and I am biased toward knowing where you're going to leap on this diving board due to the fact that we've had hours and hours of conversations involving these type of topics. Prashant, what's your take?
And there is the fact that I come from Hindu background, so I think a lot of modern fear of death or whatever also stems from the fact that there is a lot more sensual pleasure to live for than there was in the past. That could be one thing. I think it's kind of, I think there's a lot more sort of body consciousness as a result, which I think this need to preserve the body. We already live to have perfect bodies, and I think we've become too attached to our bodies in this day and age. I think I think that's one of the things. And but the other thing I find that there's also the whole paradoxical thing where I know so many people who in their daily lives show almost no signs of life, but when the moment they fall ill and the moment it becomes serious, they get this spark where they're rushing about to prevent, to get to to not to die, So there's a sense of tired of living and feared of dying. That song Old Man River, that sort of that line, there is that element of that. But I think the root of it is all some sort of weird body. We have too much body consciousness.
Interesting. Hadn't considered that from that perspective. So we will return to there. Matt, over to you. What's your take on these points?
Well, I think it's awkward from a Western perspective for two main reasons. I think it's fear, and I think it's denial. So it's not so much. Well, I suppose a part of it is it does result in awkwardness, but I think that going sort of echoing really what Richard said, there is this sense of immortality, and I often draw the analogy between when people are smokers and they're looking at the warnings, the increasingly horrific warnings on the back of a cigarette packet, and I think we automatically look at those things and go, yeah, I feel really bad for the people that's going to happen to, but it's not going to happen to me. And I think that can be applied to the whole concept of death, that we don't really want to engage with it, and we don't necessarily we don't engage with it fully enough to properly recognize that yes, life is a terminal condition. This is going to happen. So we'd rather delay. And I think fear, and personally, from the times that I've had when I've been sort of very close to death with family members, I mean, it happened. I was in there. There was a fear about talking about it too soon. It felt personally like if I spoke about it too soon in the process, somehow I might be accelerating that person's death. Somehow I might be contributing to them giving up. And so there's a little, and that was where the fear sat for me, not so much for myself, for the loss, but the fear that I was going to somehow impact on their will to maybe get over this or to be around for a little bit longer while they were still relatively, cognizant and they weren't in an awful lot of pain. And that somehow, you could accelerate death somehow by talking about it.
Yeah, I see that. And so someone called Sarah Kiff, Kiff, wrote a paper called How Refusal to Talk About Death Hurts the Elderly. And she says that this conversation isn't about death at all. Actually, death is the word that confuses the conversation, and it makes people too afraid, too angry, too frantic to keep talking. It's actually about life. It's about life management rather than the end. It's actually what happens just before and how that's handled. Anita Hanning from Brandeis University, fascinating writer, said that, and professor, said that by encouraging end-of-life conversations early on in a person's life, her hope is to regain our societal knowledge of death, and that we can learn to talk about our mortality in ways that improve everything from grief counselling to hospice care. She says in around her experiences as a professor, she said that speaking about death openly and through cross-cultural frameworks relieves so many of her students' anxieties and her own anxieties. And studying the intricate ways that people in their cultures navigate end of life allows us to see that there are a variety of possible responses to human frailty and finitude. She also says that it helps us all to acknowledge that death is an integral part of life, and that's a good lesson for us all. So as I go back to you, Richard, when now we have kind of covered various different versions of why we may find these things taboo and awkward, however you personally, and I echo this somewhat, feel slightly more comfortable maybe than others. Do you see the topic of end-of-life planning as something, to echo Matt's point, as being a bit fatalistic and a bit kind of encouraging of us to give up hope? Or do you see end-of-life planning as something that is pragmatic, prudent, and practical?
Interesting, because what I was thinking when listening to the guys talking there was, as a coach, we help people to set goals, and by setting a goal and programming your brain, your reticular activating system, somehow by programming your brain, you're going to make something more likely. So setting goals and creating plans makes something more likely. I don't know if that applies to death. Although there is a Japanese word, I can't remember the word, but Japanese have a word for dying of a broken heart. It's literally your lifelong partner dies and you just don't want to be alive. That's a recognized medical condition. You can technically die of a broken heart. So I don't know. I think if you were to set we should all set a goal. I am going to die. I mean, that's not a goal. That's just a fact, right? But I think saying it all the time isn't going to speed it up. If there's a chemical in your body called NAD, it's the basis of every. I work for a pharmaceutical company. Every single cell in your body requires something called NAD to function. If you don't have it, you're dead within about 30 seconds. Luckily, you produce it naturally, and you can take tablets for it. But I don't know. So I think I don't want us to set a goal of dying, because we don't need to. But the goal theorists would say the secret of success is to set a goal and then forget about it, and then just focus on the day-to-day activities and all the little bits and get on with the today, because the today makes up the future. Chinese proverb, all that sort of stuff.
Indeed, indeed, and I think it's interesting you point this, and I can segue well to Prashant from what you've said, because Prashant was talking about the amorphous view of humanizing our life to such an extent where we become obsessed with our body. The syndrome you're talking about is called Takotsubo, or Takotsubo, which is the broken heart syndrome. Funny enough, actually, what most people don't know, other than the fact that it is a severe form of instant heart failure, Takotsubo is actually the name for an octopus pot. And an octopus pot has a unique shape that the left ventricle resembles with this particular.
Of course, like a sort of
Yeah, so that's why it's called Sakatsu. But what I'm interested about from what you've said and linking to what Prashant said, and Prashant, over to you, is our obsession with our humanity, or our human form, something that has equal benefits and detriments to it? Or would you posit that our over emphasis of our human form is something that limits our ability to be more awakened of a greater sense of real life? Are we limiting ourselves?
Well, the thing is, this is taking my mind to abstract places. So now, do you associate humanity with human form? I think, does it stop there? I think we probably live in a moment where, in an environment that keeps us from understanding the full extent of what humanity is, and in that sense, from understanding what the nature of life is. And death, life, is there really a difference? And you go into Oriental philosophy. I'd actually kind of I decided to fish out my copy of the Upanishads, which is a Sanskrit text of philosophy. And there's this dialogue that begins: in the beginning there was nothing here. This was covered by death, by hunger, for hunger is death. Death made up his mind. If only I could have a self. Shining, he moved about, and as he shone, the waters were born of him. So, everything is born out of death. It's a sort of creation myth in which death is the beginning, and life comes out of death looking for a self.
Mm.
It's
do you feel, to really internalize that in your life, is that something that you believe in and not believe in? Do you resonate with that? And in that resonance, if you do have it, does that enable you to have a different perspective on life?
I mean, I do. I mean, I think what resonates with me is this notion that the body's not. I think there. Yeah, I mean, to an extent, it does. I mean, death is just a transformation of sorts. I mean, moving on to the next stage, sort of thing. We don't know what lies beyond. But yeah, I do. I mean, I suppose the whole philosophy of the Advaita, Vedanta, resonates with me. The notion that our essence or consciousness will always be there, and that is eternal.
Yeah.
So that does resonate with me.
There's a huge amount of synergy between those particular parts of the Eastern faiths and things you can read from people like Brian Cox, Professor Brian Cox, in his brilliant book called Everything That Can Happen Does Happen. And actually the Quantum Universe Explained is remarkably similar to some of the Sanskrit statements of how things are structured. And Prashant, do you feel as if, I will go over to you, Matt, in a second to follow from this, but Prashant, do you feel as if we are, with quantum physics, bizarrely coming full circle round to an understanding of everything being an essence in and of itself, and everything actually all happening at once, with a gradual realization of its own energy?
I think so. It's all a slow evolution, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I think it is moving into that non-material place, into that sort of essential place. So I definitely think so. Essence and energy, and there's a Japanese physicist who's I forget his name anyway, who'd written something about this. But yeah, it does seem that a lot of scientists are moving in that direction.
Yeah, I wonder that. I do find that to be very, that I think that might be happening. I reckon that you would be talking about Mitsu.
That's the one.
Yeah,
Mitsu
Mitsu actually is probably my go-to guy. Sadly died 20 years ago. Prominent Japanese physicist and funny enough Marxist as well. I think that the concentration on essence and energy and its meaning and humanity is now starting to come to the fore. Matt, from your perspective, do you feel that the volume of end of life that you've experienced as an observer, son, sibling, do you feel as if your witnessing has changed your view of end of life at all over your years? I imagine that it's impossible not to have changed your view. I don't want to trivialize it by saying, has it made you more philosophical about it? So I'll be more tangible, and like, how has your feeling of end of life changed over the years?
Yeah, I mean, most certainly. And I think that's probably the same for a lot of people, that once you experience it more directly, then it kind of forces you to, well, maybe force is the wrong word, but it puts you in a situation where you are more open to facing it and reevaluating what it means to you, and maybe what it makes you think about your own mortality. It certainly did for me, and it made me think about. In fact, I'd written down procrastination in big letters when I was listening back to Richard, and I think that this that's a major thing again in the Western world, that life seems to be synonymous with length. So it's very easy if your goal is just to keep extending life, and that is where you put the value in it, as opposed to, regardless of what length of time it is, filling it with as much kind of learning and pleasure as you can. That kind of lends itself to procrastination, because if your focus is just to worry about, if you've got it in your head that, I want to get to 80, I want to get to 85, then, at 50, why am I paying so much attention to this, or any attention to this? Whereas certainly for me, it's made me think very deeply about, one, I think that Dignitas and that whole subject of being able to make that decision to kind of end your life, if you've got yourself in a situation where all you're looking at is demise, less and less ability to function, and your dignity, your perception of your dignity is just in decline as well. It makes me think much more about trying to do as much as I can with the time I've got while I'm healthy, and stop obsessing so much in constantly sort of saving to live this better life somewhere down the line. Because an awful lot of the time you just witness that never happens. That's potentially another lie that we've all bought into, that we invest in these pensions and we save and we buy a home so that we can somehow then pay it off, so that when we're maybe 65, we've suddenly got this freedom, where that normally kind of links in with the slow demise of our bodies. And before you know it, you've lost your house because you're paying to pay for ever increasingly expensive care, and you don't experience that freedom at all.
Yes.
So I personally would be very happy to have that as an option for myself, so that if it came to it, I could just spend an awful lot less. I could save for a lot shorter period of time to afford, going and having a lovely last trip with a group of close friends, and then going to sleep painlessly, rather than just watching, my nearest and dearest gathering around me, watching me increasing pain, and really kind of part of them wishing that it was all over for me anyway.
Yeah, I remember when I was witnessing my ex-wife's parents' journeys to their ends, one after another, and what was amazing was their relentless gripping onto their savings account that they had for a rainy day. And my ex-wife and I would say to them, "This is the rainy day. This is actually the rainy day now." And they're like, "No, we can't touch the savings." And it's like there's not going to be any rainier day than this. There is a societal or cultural generational feeling of austerity there, which is tough, man. So yeah, I really hear you, Richard. In a world where we have, according to the Kaiser Family Foundation in 2017, their late life survey, they found that 97% of people say that it's important to put their wishes in writing, and 37% of people have done it. That gap between the two, bearing in mind that you are an expert in enabling people to see things from a different perspective, especially in their business life, how would you strategize enabling that huge difference in volume of people to actually realize that it's important to start the conversation with their loved ones now? How would you strategize that as a project? If you were paid as a consultant to come and solve that, what would you do?
Yeah. Well, there's a big difference between being strategic and having a strategy. I think the quick answer is something about just writing down a will or putting a plan in place. We'll call it a will, but there's obviously something else we can call it. Just by doing that, it's literally, let's get it done. Let's park it. Let's put it in the vault. Let's, and then let's just get on with now. So I think if we could get people to, it's kind of anxiety and fear and that sort of thing. So I think, strategically, I'd say to people, look, That mindfulness, it's interesting, mindfulness and Buddhism and coaching, they're all kind of the same thing. What I realized, I had a mindfulness coach, and what I realized by about week 5 was she kept saying, you're too much in your head, Richard. You need to move into become aware of your body. And it made me think about the word embodiment. I thought, that's where the word, so mindfulness isn't all about your mind. There's a really good article, actually, I found it the other day, New Scientist, called Your Thinking Body, Why Consciousness Isn't All in the Mind. And what it's saying is because of I don't know if it's the brain-gut connection, the same stem cells. What it says is that actually the future is not, artificial intelligence and a brain in a bubbling jar of green liquid, because it's never going to get to just the mind. It's always going to be, you need the body as well. So, it's interesting. And I actually lived in India for 3 years, and I think kind of familiar with a Hindu mindset, I would say. Hey, we've always got the next life to come back to. Then maybe they more accept what their current life. I don't know. And some people accept their current life. Others make the most of the current life because they want to, come back in a different form later. I don't know, but I think
and it's a really good. It's also a good shout. The writer of that article, or who is referencing it, is someone called Sarah Garfinkel, who was in Michigan studying brain circuitry, and then went to the University of Sussex in the UK, I think. And what I found fascinating about her research was that realizing that our thoughts and our feelings and behaviors are shaped in part by the internal signals that arise from our body is very much along the lines that, for instance, Dr. Joe Dispenza has arrived at in epigenetics, realizing that actually our body comprises our mind in total. And in fact, a very small part of our sense of self and our sense of belonging and our sense of structure comes from what's inside our head. Our entire body is actually an organism that actually runs those circuitries, which links back to, this is a beautiful segue, back to our friend from the Eastern religion backgrounds, Prashant, who can now own the entire chakras as a field of expertise in this segue. Does this go against or go toward your concern over an over-embodiment of self, or does it actually speak neatly to how the energy centers of ourself have been seen and are increasingly seen, as in this rebound of Eastern religion into the West, as how we really are structured rather than just our thoughts?
I don't know. I think, consciousness is something that goes beyond thought. I mean, personally, in fact, thought and feeling are, something that exists at the earthly level. And I think in the Eastern tradition, to actually tap into what the essence of what you are, even the word consciousness is probably too small. You have to rise even beyond consciousness. That's what you meditate for, to actually tap into silence, and and in that silence you become sort of aware of what life truly is about. And in that sense, death can only exist if you look at yourself at the level of the body, and if you get in touch with your true essence, you're only aware of life, because that's what it. I mean, that's the tradition. That's how the Indian tradition views it.
Yeah, I must admit, I do relate to that strongly, and also, I mean, I'm like really honoured to help build something called With Grace, that is kind of in hoping to come to market at some stage, enabling people to have a post-life plan in place, shared with their loved ones, information stored, messages that they can pre-record, a navigation system of where important things are, so that the logistics are removed from the grieving process, which is a nightmare. When people do pass, you have to suddenly become a project manager, whilst actually what you should be doing is doing the grieving part. and I think one of the most profound things that's happened with looking at kind of assisting with Grace to come to market is that there's been rarely any conversations with anyone where there hasn't been resonance. Now, so if you go to withgrace.io, for instance, the video that was created shows a lady who goes through her life and records various different important pieces of information and nominates her brother to be her key lead nominee, who knows where the passwords are, knows where the memories are stored, can find the video messages for loved ones that she's recorded while she's alive. And the removing the complexity of post-life planning is what With Grace is on the mission to solve. Matt, if you were to if you were to want to leave a legacy, to create a legacy of yourself, and keep a cookie trail, breadcrumb trail of where your stuff is, how have you currently gone about that? Have you told your partner where your passwords are? Does everyone know how to get into your 10,000 unreleased songs of genius that are in some kind of cassette box somewhere? How can people get to your stuff if you were to not be with us anymore?
At the minute they couldn't. My focus is really more about trying to redirect my life purpose. And it's I haven't thought about the logistics side of it. I'm just trying to, I guess, when I'm on a path which I feel is more aligned with myself, then maybe I'll start thinking about wanting to document stuff. Maybe I'll think that there's a legacy worth leaving. Whereas at the minute, might as well just leave one video message going, I tried some shit, none of it worked. Bye. But yeah, I actually watched that With Grace video again just before this started, and it's actually quite touching. And part of it's probably to do with the emotive music, but it touched me. And I think that there was a couple of things that I wanted to mention off the back of that, and one was, I think you're bang on that whole having to suddenly become a project manager right at the point where what you should be starting to do is to grieve, or at least engage with the grief process. And I, up until now, I sort of just described that when people were in touch with me, when my mum died or when my sister died, I would often sort of say, I guess I'm in survival mode right now. And I think that whole logistics side of things puts you into what I was describing as survival mode, when really it was like delay mode. Survival mode should have been engaging with grief as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And that to me is more synonymous with living than going through the practical ins and outs of, trying to carry on or get this logistics sorted, or, I've still got to pay the bills. So anything that could have, taken that crap away, and let me just, face things and engage with it more quickly, I think it's a really good thing. The other thing, just harping back to, I was nodding furiously when you mentioned Joe Dispenza, and I was thinking about Joe Dispenza when Prash was talking about this whole, how obsessed are we with just our bodies. And there's something that he talks about a lot when you're going through, some of the guided meditations. And when I first listened to the words, I am no one in no place in no time, the calm that brought, that almost permission to step away from being caught and restricted in one physical form, in one place, and restricted by time, to somehow be encouraged and invited to sort of transcend all of that. And I think that also, when you can get into that state, and I'm nowhere near yet, but that state that Prash was talking about, to really elevate way above consciousness and to be in a completely different realm altogether, and to be linked in with the whole kind of quantum field, and for it to suddenly start making sense. I think that's where you can, where some real magic can happen as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. I must admit, I know I mentioned this on the last video as well, so I don't want to become too overly promoting, but what I've really found useful, and I've used cacao successfully to do this with, it has been phenomenally useful in my life to actually have something happen in my brain that actually doesn't attach such a great degree of caring about outcomes. And for some reason or another, and I've tried it almost all of the other versions, from psilocybin mushrooms to CBD, THC, to smoking weed, everything from microdosing various different things, and acid and DMT experiences, and ayahuasca, 3 primary ayahuasca healings. The thing that has actually had the most profound effect is actually cacao. Bizarre. And actually, here's the thing: you don't need the 50 quid ceremonial cacao. You can have the 100% cacao from Holland & Barrett for 9 quid and have exactly the same effect. And it's bonkers level of and the actual effect that I found is that it's actually stopped my micro care of, this is happening to me, everything's going to shit, everything's probably going to go to shit, oh fuck, why is life so complicated, and all this. And actually this just kind of, for some unknown reason, just goes into my brain and goes, it doesn't fucking matter. And it's just like, oh, actually, right, yeah, that's right. Okay, sweet. And that's a profound outcome of thinking it doesn't, and actually you don't actually matter either. Nothing matters and you don't matter. The whole thing doesn't matter. And life feels a lot better under those circumstances.
Can I ask you a quick question, John, on that before we move on?
Richard, I'll go
again, I guess it links back to Joe Dispenza as well. Is, you're talking about cacao being the thing that really kind of did it for you after trying all other kind of stuff, and mentioning about you don't even need the ceremonial stuff. You go for some, normally when you're having these kind of conversations, Holland and Barrett is like a swear word. Just don't go for the watered down rubbish. You know what I mean? That's all about profit. Go for the proper stuff. And I just wondered to what degree you think, coming back to Joe Dispenza and that whole "you are the placebo" argument.
Yeah. I think massive.
How much you think that's actually you connected with it, but now it's really you who has kind of taken over.
Totally. I not only do I wholeheartedly believe that you are the placebo is not only a stalwart, brilliant book, but also even Becoming Supernatural, which, to be honest with you, includes the whole of You Are Placebo in it. So for anyone watching and reading, you may as well just do Becoming Supernatural, because it includes placebo, and his science has moved on and progressed into even brilliant, more brain scanning technologies and stuff. Yeah, of course. The fact of the matter is, I can recognize in my head just even a whiff of that that receptor kickoff that probably comes from something that is way more diluted from the Holland Barrett Tesco's Waitrose cacao, from the ceremonial stuff. And then my brain does the rest. I mean, I've always said, if you really want to wipe out Class A drugs in the world, right, what you do is you legalize the whole thing, and then you actually replace gradually the Class A drugs with placebos. And you give, and people can go and get their shot of heroin. And I guarantee you, after 24 hours, you give them a shot of heroin that isn't heroin, that is sold as heroin, that's totally, and people will be just as certain. They'll go, man, this is even better. And we're so powerful in our minds. because our bodies, it can experience things, but also we can experience things from the memory of experiencing things. And our cells actually structure themselves, and our genes structure ourselves around our memories of what we thought something was like. So all I've done now with cacao is I've stopped spending 50 quid for 500 grams, and I spend 10 quid for 500 grams. And to be honest with you, if you could give me something that costs 90p, that smells like cacao and looks like cacao and is called cacao and has the same impact, I'll buy that too, because I'm not going to convince myself that it has to be the purest. You know, it's every guitarist knows that, to be honest with you, Fender Stratocasters aren't actually that good as guitars, but because Jimi Hendrix played one, it's a Fender Stratocaster. Yamaha make way better guitars, but no one really famous has played one. But the fact, so you buy a Fender Stratocaster and you play it in these guitar shops and people go, oh, just listen to the tone. It's shit. It's just a generic lump of wood with strings on it. But you believe it's what Hendrix played, therefore it sounds great. Let's charge you 1,500 quid. And the cacao world is exactly the same as that. So anyway, that's my view. Richard, what's your take on what we've discussed?
Yeah, no, you're triggering so many thoughts. I mean, my first few years of life, I worked in an explosives factory, so kind of lived close to death for 4 years, but actually it was the safest place on the planet, I'd say. But I actually moved into the pharmaceutical sector, and I realized that most of we invented beta blockers, and what you just said there about, in fact, the drug that was used for anxiety was a beta blocker, but it was in a big, bright, shiny packet with big, shiny pills to make you feel you were being treated. And it was actually, probably a lot of it was placebo, but there was a thing. But I'm thinking, when you got all excited there about it doesn't matter, I thought, how could I replicate that feeling? But you saying it does matter, without the chemicals? Because, I mean, there's a thing called anandamide. Have you heard of anandamide? So that's from marijuana, chocolate, and I think truffles. So if you can afford marijuana, truffles, and pure chocolate, you'll have a lot of anandamide. And ananda comes from the Sanskrit word. But so I'm thinking, what can we do to your brain without external chemicals? Because you actually produce a lot of stuff you need. The study of the hotel cleaners who were told, hey, look, you cleaning rooms is really good exercise.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, that one. But so I'm thinking, what if we stuck you guys, so to take away your bodies, what we'll do is we'll do what Google tech teams and Navy SEALs, when they want to learn Arabic very quickly, they get out of their bodies and they lie in a flotation tank. And that changes your brain waves. And so they can learn things much more quickly because they kind of get rid of their body temporarily in the flotation tank. I mean, England rugby team use it to recover quicker because it's got Epsom salts. But actually, Google Teams and so I'm told, the book's called Stealing Fire. Breaking Bad is there is Breaking Bad. The official version of Breaking Bad is called the pharmaceutical industry. It's just the brand. So I wonder, could we get you to say it does matter? What could we put into your head? A thought, probably just a thought.
Well, the question is really what does matter, and so one of the things that I think probably does matter, to be honest with you, and Prashant, I'm just about to come over to you in closing, and then we'll just do one more round with our final thoughts. To riff off what Richard's saying, personally, my view is that the one thing that matters is our ability to be aware of the fact that reality is purely a perception. And if we are to realize that is not a absolute reality, but actually all perceived reality, then from that, we can do a number of things, including modify our version of reality, and including what Viktor Frankl would say, not being such prisoners of our thoughts. We can actually take what we witness and actually choose our responses and thus create our reality. My wife has just poured me, as we've been speaking, my third little dose of cacao water. I have no understanding of how much she's put in it, but because there's quite a lot, I imagine it's quite a lot, therefore I'll feel even better, right? I'm fully aware of the fact, and what I do think does matter is that reality is total perception. Prashant, if in closing, what would you say does matter about life and death and this conversation? What would you say is the most important part?
I think ultimately it's all about just living in the moment, understanding that, you have to try and live with purpose. I think that's what ultimately matters. Clear your mind of extraneous noise. Try and tune into what you are. Try to find your real purpose. I think a quote from my favorite classical poet, Ovid, sort of encapsulates my view. Towards the end of the Metamorphoses, he writes, "My work is finished now. No wrath of Jove, nor sword, nor fire, nor futurity, whatever, is capable of laying waste to it. Let that day come then, when it wishes to, which only has my body in its power, and put an end to my uncertain years. No matter, for in spirit I will be borne up to soar beyond the distant stars, immortal in the name I leave behind. Wherever Roman governance extends over the subject nations of the world, my words will be upon the people's lips. And if there is truth in poets' prophecies, then in my fame forever I will live." So
Lovely quote.
So there's I'd sort of take the essence of that, to heart, sort of.
Good. Thank you. And that's a brilliant quote for you to end on as well, Prashant. I really appreciate that. Matt, what would you say is important from what we've spoken about and life and death?
I think for me, and maybe this is just because every time I come on one of these chats, it is ridiculously obvious that you lot are so much better read than me. So maybe this is my justification. But I would say for me, and it also links back to other conversations we've had in this group about men being able to engage with feelings and that whole kind of toxic masculinity side of things as well. The more I can engage with things like death with feelings as...
Oh, we seem to have paused there. Matt, are you still with us? Okay, Richard, I think I'm going to come over to you to do your closing remark while we wait for Matt to rejoin.
Yeah, no, lots of thoughts going on. I think, yeah, I love the work of Michael Neal. It says, we're not, our minds and our eyes are not, it's not a camera that's going on. We're not taking pictures of what's out there. We are projecting what's in our head. So we are, it's the inside out, not the outside in. So I start thinking about bucket lists. So when we write a bucket list, that what are we going to do before we kick the bucket? And you're kind of saying, what do we do after we've kicked the bucket? So it's like a post-bucket kicking list or something. I don't know what you call it. That's what we need.
Get on that domain immediately.
After the bucket. So I would point you towards the work of Lisa Feldman Barrett, who has said, we don't have a lizard brain. We don't, emotions are not built in, they are built. So actually, it's a lot of, we just don't really understand how our brains work. She's getting close to it. So our brain just guesses stuff. So why not kind of educate it to kind of guess right and stop going back into negative sabotage thought patterns? And I think if I have no fear of dying, then I should also have no fear of living, is my sort of final point.
Good. I like that point very much. Matt, over to you again. We missed your last tiny bit, but I want you to at least have the opportunity to finish what you were saying before you dropped out.
Okay. I wonder what might happen then. I thought maybe just boredom.
No.
Yeah, I think to engage with the emotional side of loss, the fear of death, as opposed to maybe intellectualizing it too much, because if you intellectualize it too much, then I would argue that is another deflection technique, because you're detaching yourself from the concept and talking about it like a thing, as opposed to something that actually you feel very deeply, and you fear very deeply potentially. So the more you can engage with it on an emotional level, especially I think as a man, and to allow those emotions to happen, I think would be a very healthy way of re-engaging with the concept of death, and probably make me feel a lot happier about discussing it early doors.
Good.
Before leaving, I do have a point to sort of ponder. To what extent does our fear of loneliness in life contribute to our fear of death, of the hereafter? And there's just a point to ponder.
Well, actually, funny enough, that point to ponder was going to be pretty much where I was going to start my closing quotes. That one was going to be from Norman Cousins, actually. So I will start with that because you've raised that. Norman Cousins said brilliantly that death is not the greatest loss in life. The greatest loss is what dies inside us while we live. And I do wonder whether or not our fear of loneliness, quote unquote, our inability to feel enough in ourselves, is something that actually could be a real death whilst we're alive. J.K. Rowling said, I believe, that to the well-organized mind, death is the greatest next adventure. And Chuck Palahniuk said, I believe it was Chuck Palahniuk, said that we all die. The goal isn't to live forever. The goal is to create something that will. Emily Dickinson said that that it will never come again is what makes life so sweet. And in two final closing quotes, and Prashant, I have to close on a Metamorphosis quote, obviously for you. One is by Murakami, which is probably my favorite quote about the end of life, which is, "Death is not the opposite of life, but a part of it." And finally, by Franz Kafka, in Metamorphosis, so an alternative version of Metamorphosis, which is, "How about if I sleep a little bit longer and forget about all this nonsense?" And that, I think, is going to be how we close this beautiful recording. And thank you for everyone joining. And if anyone would like to, you can go to academyofadvancedthought.com, where this video exists. Click on the Facebook group, join that. Withgrace.io is a service that is, I'm hoping to help launch to become real. And yeah, I think that all of the thoughts on this call are valid and poignant. And I hope that some of you who watch it are somehow moved to think and act, or maybe seek another level of consciousness or unconsciousness to deal with our wonderful beauty that we're in. I shall end the recording now. Guys, please stay on for just 30 seconds so I can thank you individually, and thank you all for watching.